For the first time in my life, I've lived in a place that isn't in California for over 30 days. There's a lot more days to come, but I'm going to talk about everything I've learned so far living here in Japan for a month now. Firstly, let's talk about the logistics of living in Japan if you're an American citizen. It's actually rather simple. As of making this video, you're allowed to stay up to 90 days in Japan until you have to leave the country. But after you leave the country, you're permitted to re-enter the country for another 90 days. However, you're only allowed to stay up to 180 days in Japan during that calendar year. So for instance, if you spent 180 days in Japan for 2024, you are no longer allowed re-entry until 2025 hits. And it's pretty much as simple as that. So the next question is, how did I find where to stay? And this is something I would have done differently if I started over. I'd say the two most viable options that are similarly priced are apartments and share houses. You can also look for a host family to stay with too, but that might be slightly pricier depending on the area. But a new friend I made who is currently staying with the host family says it's definitely a very good experience, so consider that one as well. But for me, I'm currently staying at a share house near Kyoto station managed by a company called Oakhouse. I actually think this share house is really nice, clean, and comfortable. Although I did have to buy a different pillow and some other blankets before it was comfortable to sleep in. But the rooms have their own toilets, mini kitchen, and a fair amount of space that's probably similar to an apartment size. The only issue I have is that the community space here is quite unfortunately small. There are very nice people here, but the space in the share house doesn't really encourage hanging out since it's kind of isolated and secluded. I visited two other friends' share houses that were the complete opposite. Their rooms were smaller and they have shared toilets, but their community space actually feels like a real home where everyone was eating dinner together, talking together, and just hanging out. It reminded me of the fun nights I would have with my friends when we traveled together and stayed at Airbnbs. Both of their share houses happen to be owned by borderless, and they maintain a balance of having Japanese natives and foreigners in each houses, which I think is super awesome since I got to meet a lot of Japanese people and practice my Japanese. So if I were to start over, I would definitely have been more proactive in researching share houses that have a large community space and a smaller amount of people. Currently, the place I'm staying at has 40 to 50 tenants, and I believe the other borderless houses seem to only have about 15 to 24 people. I'm actually in the process of moving share houses right now to borderless, so I'll see how it goes. But I do want to stress that it's really all about what you're looking for. If the community aspect isn't as important for you and you prefer a more private setting like an apartment with occasional events, then I think this specific Oak House would be great. I'll leave a link down below if you're curious. The process overall is simple. Just contact them that you're interested in a room and they'll help you from there. Super easy. And for the one that I'm staying in, it's about $600 per month. The first month was pricier though. I'm making a dedicated video to talk about all my expenses in the first month of Japan, so if you're curious, be sure to subscribe. Let's move on to another really important aspect to moving and living in Japan. What is your purpose? I talked about why I'm in Japan in my previous video, so check that out if you're interested for the full reasons, but I'm gonna go into what I've actually done since getting here compared to my intentions, and the struggles of aligning both of them. Firstly, language school. Learning Japanese was an inbuilt purpose that I gave myself by signing up to a language school. The one that I signed up for and am attending is ARC Academy in Kyoto. They have a simple system of offering 3-month terms for 4 times a year based on each quarter of the year. I'm in the one from January to March. And in each term, you go through one of 9 levels based around learning the JLPT, N5 to N1. So if you were to take language school for a year, you'd take 4 terms and at the end, you'd be around N3 level, assuming you started from the beginning. For me, after taking the entrance exam, I was placed in the second level, which goes over the end of N5 and some of N4. So far, I've been enjoying the classes. I think the teachers do a great job at constructing the lessons and providing energy. For me, the classes seem to be at a good pace, and I don't really need to study or do homework outside of classes to keep up and do well in the exams. However, I am starting to change my ways since I think reviewing will help speed up my goal of listening and speaking enough to have a good conversation with a native. I will say though that a lot of the classes and how much interest there is depends highly on the sensei, the teacher. They kind of make or break the classroom setting, especially since language school is 3 hours and 15 minutes every weekday. I should also mention that if you apply for a student visa, which another American friend told me wasn't hard, you can stay in Japan for a lot longer. You just need to make sure that you don't miss classes and that you do well on the exams, otherwise you could get your student visa revoked. But what I've learned the most is that even though language school is great, I don't think it can substitute talking to actual natives and practicing your speaking and listening daily. So being more proactive about seeking that real and consistent practice is important, and is definitely a reason why I'm moving share houses. Everyone that I've talked to at higher levels have all told me that this is the single most important thing in learning Japanese, to talk and listen to native speakers as much as possible. Anyways, towards the end of the first month, the school asked me if I wanted to continue next term. I actually considered it because of how much I've been enjoying my time in Japan, but I ultimately decided not to. It costs 192,000 yen per term, which is about $1,300. That isn't too bad, but I feel like I can use that money for something like private lessons instead. Either way, I do think going through at least one term of language school has been a very good experience. Getting to see the way they teach, how their systems work, and the pace of things was very useful. But I think most importantly is that I got to meet a lot of new friends at the language school. That brings us to another very important topic when living in a new place: friends and connections. Personally, this was probably my top priority here in Japan. I absolutely love meeting new people, forming new connections, and going on new adventures to make awesome memories. I got to experience that a lot in Singapore and Bali last year, and it made me feel the most alive. Thankfully, it's pretty easy to make friends when you're in a language school or a share house that has community. Just talk and ask if other people want to hang out. That's one thing that's great about being in Kyoto, Japan. There's just so many things to do, places to see, and the city itself, if you're near the center, is quite small, so it's easy to hang out with people. Since I live close to Kyoto Station, I could pretty much walk or run anywhere my friends would want to hang out. But this also somewhat oddly presents a new issue. There's just so many things to do and see that it can sometimes be a little overwhelming, at least in the first month. At the current moment, I've settled at a pace of every 2 to 3 days of seeing a nice nature area and going to visit a place further away every weekend. It's a lot of exploring, but oddly, I don't feel tired here in Japan, at least not yet. My lifestyle is completely different now compared to in California because I'm walking so much and going out every day, talking to new people, trying new foods and restaurants, hanging out with friends, and it seriously makes a huge difference in my state of being. I just feel so much more alive and good out here, compared to in California, where most of the time I did a lot of work from home stuff, stayed at home, and just only really went out during the weekends. So it is a vast difference, and it feels like I've lived 3 months worth of activities in 1 month. And I don't know if it's just because it's the first 30 days, but I'll find out as I keep going. I've actually been doing audio journals and vlogs of every single day in my journey here so far in Japan on my second channel if you're curious to checking it out. I go into a lot more detail on what I do day to day, telling some fun stories and my thoughts and so on. But for this video, let's just say life in Kyoto is pretty sweet. The only problem, like I mentioned before, is balancing everything. The language learning, exploring, hanging out with friends, meeting new people, creations of videos, and still playing piano here in Japan. It seriously feels like there's not enough time in a day. But for me, this just means I gotta try harder. And luckily, I'm having fun with it, so it's a good problem. So the first 30 days of Japan have been extremely fun so far. I've learned a lot of lessons along the way, met a lot of people from very diverse backgrounds, and have been feeling more myself more than ever. It's seriously incredible how just being in a different environment can change the way you feel so drastically. Hopefully some of what I talked about can be helpful to some of you guys out there. My next video will be about how much I spent on my first month of living here in Japan. I think that'll be a fun one, so be sure to subscribe and check it out when it drops. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.